Story 1. The Mile Marker That Counted Down. Marcus Holloway had been running freight across the Midwest for 17 years when he took the overnight haul down Interstate 70 through Kansas in late October 2019. He'd driven this route hundreds of times, knew every rest stop and truck plaza between Kansas City and Denver. The load was straightforward, industrial equipment heading to a manufacturing plant in Colorado, and the weather forecast was clear. Marcus left the Kansas City depot at 10 p.m., settling into the familiar rhythm of highway driving as his rig merged onto the westbound lanes. The first few hours passed without incident. Marcus kept his CB radio onto the usual trucker channel, listening to the scattered conversations between drivers scattered across the night. The highway stretched empty before him, illuminated only by his headlights cutting through the darkness. He'd grabbed coffee at a truck stop near Junction City around midnight, fueling up and checking his route before heading back onto the interstate. The attendant had been a younger guy, maybe mid-20s, who'd seemed nervous when Marcus mentioned he was heading west through the night. "You be careful out there," the attendant had said, glancing toward the highway. "Had a couple drivers come through here tonight talking about weird stuff on that stretch past Salina. Probably just road fatigue, but still." Marcus had thanked him but thought little of it. In 17 years he'd heard every kind of trucker tale and superstition. Most of it was boredom and exhaustion playing tricks on tired minds. He merged back onto I-70, watching the mile markers tick past in his peripheral vision. Mile 272, mile 273, mile 274. The numbers climbed steadily westward as they always did, mechanical and predictable. Around 2 a.m., roughly 30 miles west of Salina, Marcus noticed something odd. He'd just passed mile marker 290 when he spotted the next marker ahead in his headlights. Mile marker 289. He blinked, certain he'd misread it, but as he rolled past, there was no mistaking the number. 289. He glanced in his mirrors, seeing the 290 marker receding behind him. That couldn't be right. The markers should increase going west, not decrease. Marcus checked his GPS, which showed him heading west on I-70 exactly as planned. His speedometer read a steady 65 miles per hour. Everything seemed normal except those mile markers. He watched carefully for the next one. Mile marker 288 appeared exactly 1 mile later. Then 287, then 286. The numbers were counting backward as he drove west. He grabbed his CB radio mic. "Breaker, breaker, this is Running Man heading west on I-70 near Salina. Anyone else on this stretch seeing weird mile markers?" "Over." Static crackled through the speaker. No response. Marcus tried again, adjusting the channel. Still nothing but empty static. The CB had worked fine at the truck stop an hour ago. He set the mic down, feeling the first whisper of unease crawl up his spine. The highway remained absolutely empty in both directions. He hadn't seen another vehicle since leaving the truck stop. Mile marker 285 slid past, then 284. Marcus pressed his foot slightly harder on the accelerator, watching his speed climb to 70. If this was some kind of construction error with the markers, he'd drive through it quickly and get back to normal highway. But the markers continued their backward countdown. 283, 282, 281. Each one appearing precisely 1 mile after the last, their reflective surfaces gleaming in his headlights before disappearing into the darkness behind him. His GPS still insisted he was traveling west. The compass on his dashboard confirmed it. But those markers told a different story, suggesting he was somehow moving east while pointing west. The logical explanation was that the markers were simply installed incorrectly during recent roadwork, but Marcus couldn't shake the wrongness of it. In 17 years of driving, he'd never encountered anything like this. At mile marker 270, Marcus noticed something else. The terrain looked different. The flat Kansas farmland should have been transitioning to slightly more rolling prairie the farther west he traveled. But instead, the landscape seemed to be getting flatter, more featureless. Even in the darkness, he could sense the change in topography. The occasional farmhouse lights that usually dotted the distance were absent. The highway felt increasingly isolated, as if it were cutting through somewhere utterly empty. Mile marker 260 passed, then 250. Marcus had now driven over 40 miles while the markers counted backward 40 numbers. His fuel gauge hadn't moved at all, still showing 3/4 of a tank exactly as it had when he left the truck stop. That wasn't possible. Even his fuel-efficient rig should have consumed a noticeable amount of diesel over that distance. He tried his cell phone, thinking to call the dispatcher or even the highway patrol to report the bizarre marker situation. No signal. The phone showed 0 bars, which seemed wrong for this stretch of I-70. There were cell towers dotted along this route specifically for trucker emergencies. Marcus had always gotten at least some signal before. Mile marker 240 glowed in his headlights and slipped past. The countdown continued relentlessly. Marcus realized with growing alarm that he was approaching mile marker 239, then 238, numbers that would put him back near Junction City if the markers meant anything. But he'd been driving west the entire time. He hadn't turned around. The highway had shown no curves, no exits, nothing but straight westward travel. At mile marker 230, Marcus saw something in the road ahead. A figure standing on the shoulder, thumb extended in the universal hitchhiker gesture. Every instinct screamed at Marcus not to stop, but as his headlights swept over the figure, he glimpsed a face twisted in desperate terror. Without fully understanding why, Marcus began to slow the rig, his foot moving to the brake. As he drew closer, the hitchhiker became clearer in his headlights. It was a trucker wearing a jacket with a familiar logo, the same freight company Marcus worked for. The man's face was gaunt, aged beyond what seemed natural, his eyes hollow and pleading. He waved frantically at Marcus, mouthing words that couldn't be heard over the engine. Marcus brought the rig to a complete stop, putting it in neutral and engaging the parking brake. He rolled down his window and the hitchhiker ran to the driver's side, gripping the mirror mount with shaking hands. "Thank God," the man gasped. "Thank God someone finally stopped. How long has it been?" "How long has what been?" Marcus asked, studying the man's haggard features. "Who are you?" "David Reeves. I drive for the same company. Look at my jacket." The man pulled at his collar, showing the company logo. "I got on this highway in 2007. I've been driving it ever since. The markers just keep counting down. Please tell me what year it is." Marcus felt ice crystallize in his veins. "It's 2019, October 2019. David Reeves made a sound between a laugh and a sob. 12 years. I've been out here for 12 years. The truck ran out of fuel ages ago. I've been walking west while the markers count down. Do you know what number they reach?" "I don't understand what's happening," Marcus said, though part of him was beginning to understand all too well. "The markers count down to 0, David said, his voice dropping to a whisper. "I got to 0 once. Kept walking past it. Do you know what comes after 0 when you're counting backward?" Marcus didn't answer. Couldn't answer. "Negative numbers," David continued. "Mile marker -1, -2, -10, -50. I walked until I reached -200. That's when I turned around, started walking east, walking against the countdown, and you know what happened?" "What?" Marcus asked, though he dreaded the answer. The markers started counting down again. -200 became -199, -198. I was walking east and the numbers kept getting lower. That's when I understood there's no escape. The direction doesn't matter. The highway only goes one way. Marcus glanced at his mirrors, then at the road ahead. "Get in. I'll turn around. We'll drive back to Junction City." "I've tried that," David said, but he moved around to the passenger side and climbed into the cab. He smelled of dust and desperation. his clothes worn thin despite the jacket. Dozens of times, the markers keep counting down no matter which direction you point the truck. East-west doesn't matter. The highway decides where you're going, not you. Marcus released the parking brake anyway, determined to prove this wrong. He swung the rig around in a careful U-turn, pointing it east back toward Kansas City. Mile marker 229 appeared in his headlights. Then 228. Then 227. Still counting down even as he drove east. "I told you," David said quietly. "It doesn't matter." Marcus grabbed his CB radio again. "Mayday, Mayday, this is Running Man on Interstate 70. Is anyone receiving?" "Over." Only static answered. "No one can hear you," David said. "I tried the radio for months before the battery died. No one's out here but us. Well, us and the others." "Others?" Marcus glanced at his passenger. "You'll see them if you stay out here long enough. Other drivers. Some walking. Some still in their trucks running on fumes or faith or whatever keeps them moving. We're all counting down together." Mile marker 220 passed. Marcus's mind raced, trying to find a logical explanation, a way out. This had to be some kind of shared delusion, mass psychosis brought on by contaminated water at that truck stop or carbon monoxide leaking into the cab. But his instruments read normal. His mind felt clear. The only thing wrong was the highway itself. "What happens at 0? Marcus asked. "You said you reached it. What did you see?" David was quiet for a long moment. "There's a truck stop at mile marker 0. Looks normal at first. Has fuel pumps, a diner, parking spaces. But it's empty, completely empty. And there's this sound coming from inside the diner, like machinery grinding, or maybe voices overlapping until they become just noise." I went inside. What was in there? Drivers. Hundreds of them, maybe thousands. Sitting in the booth, standing at the counter, all facing the same direction, watching something I couldn't see. They were all speaking, but not to each other, reciting mile markers. Mile 173, mile 246, mile -89. On and on, every driver calling out different numbers. And when I walked deeper inside, I saw that the diner went back much farther than it should have. Couldn't see the back wall. Just rows and rows of drivers all calling out mile markers. Marcus felt his hands shaking on the steering wheel. Mile marker 210 slid past. He'd been driving for 20 more miles and his fuel gauge still hadn't moved. Just like David said, running on fumes or faith. "I ran out of there," David continued. "Ran back to my truck, but it wouldn't start, out of fuel. So I started walking. Figured I'd walk east until I hit real highway, but the markers kept counting down. Eventually I gave up and just stayed near marker 200 and something, waiting for another truck to come along. You're the first one I've seen in I don't know how long. Time gets weird out here." Mile marker 200 appeared. Marcus felt a decision point approaching. He could keep driving, counting down towards 0 and whatever, waited there. Or he could stop the truck, get out, and try to find some other way. But looking at David Reeves, 12 years older than he should be, worn down to nothing but desperation and hollow eyes, Marcus understood there probably wasn't another way. "How many trucks have ended up here?" Marcus asked. "No way to know. I've seen maybe a dozen others over the years, all spread out along different markers. Some stay with their trucks until they can't anymore. Some walk. There was one guy, Rick something, who was convinced if he walked fast enough between markers he could break through to regular highway. Saw him at marker 180, said he was going to sprint west. Never saw him again. Maybe he made it. Or maybe he's still running." Mile marker 190 passed. Marcus made another decision. He pulled the rig over to the shoulder and shut off the engine. The sudden silence felt overwhelming after hours of road noise. "What are you doing?" David asked. "If we're stuck here, we need to understand the rules. You said the markers keep counting down no matter which direction we travel. But what if we don't travel? What if we just stay still? David shook his head. The highway doesn't like that, trust me. As if responding to his words, Marcus felt the truck begin to move, not roll. The parking brake was engaged, the transmission in neutral. But the sensation of movement was unmistakable, like they were on a conveyor belt sliding backward. Marcus looked out the window and saw mile marker 190 sliding past again, though the truck's wheels weren't turning. It pulls you, David said. If you're on the highway, you're moving. Only way to stop is to get completely off the pavement. Marcus released the parking brake and started the engine, pulling the rig back onto the road. At least when he was driving, he had some illusion of control. Mile marker 180 appeared ahead, then 170. The countdown continued its inexorable progress. There has to be something we're missing, Marcus said. Some rule or pattern. Highways don't just trap people. This has to make sense somehow. Does it? David laughed bitterly. I spent 5 years trying to make sense of it. 5 years looking for patterns, rules, escape routes. There's only one pattern. The markers count down. That's it. That's the only rule. They drove in silence for a while, watching the markers descend through the 160s, then 150s. Marcus thought about his wife, his daughter starting college this year. The life he'd assumed would continue in its regular patterns. How long before they reported him missing? How long before someone came looking? And if they did, would they end up on this highway too, trapped in the countdown? At mile marker 130, they saw another truck on the shoulder, this one with its hazard lights still blinking weakly. Marcus pulled over behind it and both men climbed down. The truck looked relatively new, a few years old at most. Its driver door hung open. They looked inside and found the cabin empty except for a logbook on the dashboard. Marcus opened it, flipping to the last entry. September 2018, driver named Sarah Chen. She wrote that she'd been on the highway for 3 days, that the markers were at 150 and still counting down. He flipped through earlier pages, seeing the entries grow increasingly frantic as days turned to weeks. The final entry was just numbers scrawled repeatedly across the page. 130, 130, 130, 130, 130. She probably walked, David said. When the fuel ran out, walked towards zero or away from it, doesn't matter. Either way, she's still out here somewhere. They got back in Marcus's truck and continued west. Mile marker 120, mile marker 110. Marcus found himself thinking about the number 0, trying to imagine what existed at that impossible truck stop David described. A collection point for lost drivers, all of them calling out mile markers forever. It sounded like hell, but a strangely specific kind of hell. I need you to tell me the truth, Marcus said as marker 100 approached. Is there any way out of this? Anything you've heard from other drivers? David was quiet for a long time. There's a rumor. One of the drivers I met, guy named Thomas, who'd been here for 8 years, he said he heard from someone else that if you reach mile marker 0 and keep going into negative numbers, eventually you reach negative infinity. And at negative infinity, there's supposed to be an exit, a way back to regular highway. Do you believe that? No, David said flatly, because infinity doesn't end. That's what makes it infinity. It's a trap within the trap, the promise of escape that keeps you moving forever. Mile marker 90 appeared, then 80. They were getting closer to 0 now, and Marcus could feel something changing in the air inside the cab. A pressure, like descending in an airplane. His ears popped. The dashboard lights flickered briefly. We're entering the deep zone, David said. Under marker 100, things get stranger. Your perception starts to slip. Time moves different. As if confirming his words, Marcus glanced at the clock on his dashboard and saw the numbers scrambling. rearranging themselves into impossible combinations. 8743, 1299, 000. He looked away, focusing on the road. Mile marker 70 passed, then 60. In the distance, Marcus could see lights. Not the natural glow of dawn. The sky remained stubbornly black, but artificial lights, fluorescent and harsh. The truck stop at 0 was approaching. "Last chance to turn around," David said. "We could try to stay in the high numbers, wait for someone else to come through, maybe eventually find a way out together." But Marcus knew that was just another trap, another false hope. He'd seen what 12 years on this highway had done to David Reeves. The only way forward was through, even if through led to 0 and beyond. Mile marker 50. The lights grew brighter. Marcus could see the truck stop clearly now, exactly as David had described, a standard highway oasis that looked like 10,000 others across America, except utterly empty and isolated in this void of wrong highway. The fuel pumps stood ready, their displays dark. The diner glowed with that fluorescent light, windows revealing movement inside. Mile marker 40, 30, 20. Marcus's heart hammered in his chest. Whatever happened at 0, he'd face it with eyes open. Maybe that's all any of them could do, witness what they'd been caught in, understand it even if they couldn't escape it. Mile marker 10. David gripped the dashboard, his knuckles white. "If you go in the diner, don't stay long. Don't let them pull you into their chorus." Mile marker 5. Marcus could hear it now, that sound David mentioned. A grinding, overlapping cacophony that might have been machinery or might have been human voices compressed into meaningless noise. Mile marker 1. And then finally mile marker 0. Marcus brought the truck to a stop at the fuel pumps, though he didn't need fuel. His gauge still read 3/4 full, unchanged since Junction City. They sat there for a moment, staring at the diner entrance. "What do we do now?" Marcus asked. David reached for the door handle. "We find out what comes after 0. They climbed down from the cab and walked toward the diner, the sound growing louder with each step. Marcus pushed open the door and the noise washed over them. Hundreds or thousands of voices, each calling out mile markers, an endless litany of numbers that blurred together into almost meaning. The drivers David had described filled the space, standing at booths and counters, all facing toward the back of the diner that seemed to recede into impossible distance. Marcus took one step inside, then another. The voices pressed against him, and he felt his mouth opening, his own voice joining the chorus. Mile marker 290, mile marker 143, mile marker -5. David grabbed his arm, pulling him back toward the door. "Not yet. We haven't tried everything yet." They stumbled outside, the sound fading to a dull roar behind the glass. Marcus shook his head, clearing it. How close had he come to joining them? To becoming another voice in that endless count? "The negative numbers," Marcus said. "We try them. We drive until we can't anymore, and then we walk and we keep counting down until we find the bottom or the end or whatever lies past infinity." David looked at him with those hollow eyes and nodded. "Then let's go." They climbed back in the truck, and Marcus put it in gear. Past mile marker 0, the numbers turned negative. Mile marker 1, mile marker 10, mile marker 50. The highway stretched on into darkness that seemed deeper than ordinary night. And still they drove, the countdown continuing, possibly forever, into numbers that had no business existing on any real highway. But Marcus kept his hand steady on the wheel and his foot on the accelerator because movement was the only answer he had left. And somewhere past negative infinity, he still hoped to find home. Story 2. The Passenger Who Never Aged. Carmen Rodriguez had been driving cross-country routes for 11 years when she picked up the passenger near Amarillo, Texas in March 2021. She normally didn't take riders. Company policy strictly forbid it. But the woman standing on the shoulder of Highway 287 had looked so desperate, waving her arms frantically at the approaching semi-truck, that Carmen's conscience overrode her caution. It was 3 a.m. The highway was deserted, and the temperature had dropped below freezing. No one could survive out there for long. Carmen pulled the rig onto the shoulder, watching the woman in her mirrors as she hurried toward the passenger side. She looked young, maybe early 20s, wearing a thin jacket completely inadequate for the cold and carrying a small backpack. When she climbed into the cab, Carmen noticed her hands weren't even shaking despite the temperature. "Thank you so much," the woman said, settling into the passenger seat with visible relief. "I didn't think anyone would stop. How far are you going?" "Oklahoma City," Carmen replied, pulling back onto the highway. "That help you?" "That's perfect. I'm trying to get home. Been traveling for a while." The woman smiled, and something about that smile made Carmen slightly uneasy, though she couldn't identify why. "I'm Michelle." "Carmen, you got family in Oklahoma City?" "Something like that." Michelle pulled off her jacket despite the cold that still permeated the cab, revealing a t-shirt underneath with a logo Carmen didn't recognize. "What about you? Been driving long?" Carmen explained her route, the cross-country hauls she preferred to local delivery, the satisfaction of covering vast distances and seeing different parts of the country. Michelle listened attentively, asking questions that seemed oddly specific about the trucking industry. How had it changed over the years? What was different about modern trucks versus older models? Did Carmen use GPS or still rely on paper maps? "GPS mostly," Carmen said. "Technology's changed everything in the past decade or so. Used to be we'd navigate by landmarks and road signs, call in our positions on CB radio. Now it's all satellites and tracking systems." She paused. "You seem real interested in trucking. You thinking about becoming a driver?" Michelle's smile widened. "No, I'm just curious about how things change. Time moves different on the road, doesn't it? Days blur together, places start looking the same. Must be hard to keep track sometimes." "You get used to it," Carmen said, though Michelle's observation unsettled her. There was something off about the way the younger woman spoke, a formality that didn't quite match her appearance. And those hands, still not shaking despite having been exposed to freezing temperatures moments ago. They drove in relative silence for a while, passing through the Texas Panhandle darkness. Carmen kept glancing at Michelle from the corner of her eye, noticing small details that accumulated into wrongness. The woman's clothes, while clean, looked dated. Not dramatically so, but enough that Carmen started mentally placing the style at least 10 or 15 years out of fashion. The backpack, too, old-style nylon without any of the modern ergonomic features. Around 4:30 a.m., Carmen stopped at a truck plaza for fuel and coffee. Michelle declined to come inside, saying she'd wait in the cab. When Carmen returned 20 minutes later with 2 large coffees, Michelle accepted one with thanks but didn't drink it. Just held the cup, letting it cool in her hands. "So what's in Oklahoma City?" Carmen asked as they merged back onto the highway. "Family?" "I used to live there," Michelle said. "Left in 2006. Figured it was time to see if anything changed." Carmen did quick math. If Michelle left Oklahoma City in 2006, she would have been maybe 10 years old, possibly younger. But she'd said she lived there, not that her family lived there. The math didn't work. "That's a long time to be away," Carmen said carefully. "You must have left when you were pretty young." "I was 23, Michelle replied. "So that makes me... let's see." She went quiet, her brow furrowing as if the calculation was difficult. "That's funny. I can't quite work out how old I should be now. What year is it?" The question sent a chill down Carmen's spine that had nothing to do with the temperature. "It's 2021, March 2021. Right, 2021. Michelle nodded slowly. So, 15 years. I should be 38. She turned to look at Carmen with those unsettling eyes. Do I look 38 to you? Carmen's hands tightened on the steering wheel. In the glow of the dashboard lights, Michelle looked no older than 25 at most, young, unlined, with the kind of skin that hadn't yet begun to show age. You look good for your age, Carmen said, trying to keep her voice neutral. I look exactly like I did in 2006, Michelle said. I know I do. Because I've been on this highway since then, trying to get home. Carmen's foot eased off the accelerator slightly. What do you mean you've been on this highway since 2006? I was driving from Los Angeles to Oklahoma City, had my own car, little Honda Civic. Got on Highway 287 outside Amarillo around 3 a.m. Same time you picked me up tonight. Radio was playing some song I can't remember anymore, and then something happened to the road. It started to curve when it should have stayed straight. I followed the curve and... Michelle trailed off, staring out the windshield. I've been trying to reach Oklahoma City ever since. That was 15 years ago, but I haven't aged a day. That's not possible, Carmen said, but her conviction wavered. She'd been in the trucking industry long enough to hear stories, legends about highways that trapped drivers, roads that went nowhere. Most were dismissed as tall tales, road fatigue playing tricks on exhausted minds. But looking at Michelle's face, young and unchanging, Carmen felt the certainty of the normal world begin to crack. I thought the same thing at first, Michelle continued. Thought I was just confused. Maybe had an accident and didn't remember it. But days passed, then weeks, and I never seemed to get anywhere. The highway just kept going. Sometimes other drivers would pick me up. My car ran out of gas somewhere in the first few weeks, and I'd ride with them for a while. But we'd never reach Oklahoma City. Eventually, they'd pull over or make a stop, and I'd get out to stretch my legs or use a restroom, and when I'd try to get back in, they'd drive away like they couldn't see me. Like I'd become invisible to them. Carmen wanted to pull over to put distance between herself and this impossible passenger, but something kept her driving. Mile markers slipped past in the darkness. Mile 124, mile 125, mile 126. How many times has this happened? How many drivers have picked you up? I've lost count. Dozens, maybe hundreds. I experience it as continuous. I'm with one driver, then suddenly I'm standing on the shoulder again waiting for the next one. But for them, I think time passes normally. They don't remember picking me up before. Each one thinks they're the first to stop. Michelle turned to face Carmen fully. You won't remember this conversation. Tomorrow you'll be in Oklahoma City with no memory of me. You'll check your logs and see you drove straight through without stopping for a passenger. This is my loop. My punishment or curse or whatever you want to call it. Why are you telling me this? Carmen asked. Because I'm hoping you're different. You're the first driver in a long time who's still listening this far into the conversation. Usually they start to forget around now. Usually their eyes glaze over and they stop responding to what I say. But you're still here, still hearing me. Maybe that means something. Carmen checked the dashboard clock. 5:47 a.m. But hadn't it been 4:30 just a little while ago? The drive between Amarillo and Oklahoma City should take roughly 5 hours, meaning she should be getting close. Yet the mile markers showed they were only at 130 with nearly 200 miles still to go. The math didn't work. Time was slipping. What happened to your car? Carmen asked, fighting to keep her thoughts clear. You said it. Ran out of gas. Still sitting on the shoulder somewhere around mile marker 90-something. I walked away from it 15 years ago, but I see it sometimes when I'm with different drivers. It's never moved, never been towed. Still has my stuff in the back seat. Clothes, books, everything I packed for the trip. Sometimes I think about stopping, going back to sit in it and wait. But wait for what? The highway doesn't let go. Mile marker 140 passed. Carmen's GPS showed a different number entirely, insisting they were near mile 180 and making good time toward Oklahoma City. The dashboard clock now read 3:15 a.m., earlier than when she'd picked up Michelle. Time was moving backward. "Tell me about the other drivers," Carmen said, desperate to anchor herself in conversation, in human connection, even if that human might not be human anymore. "What were they like?" Michelle seemed to consider the question. "Most were kind, worried about me being out in the cold. Some were suspicious, didn't want a rider, but couldn't bring themselves to leave me stranded. There was one man, Jake, who was driving to Tulsa. He listened to my whole story, believed me, tried to help. We drove for what felt like days, him refusing to stop, determined to break through to Oklahoma City. Eventually, he fell asleep at the wheel from exhaustion. I grabbed it, kept us on the road until he woke up. When he came to, he looked at me like he'd never seen me before and asked how I'd gotten in his truck." "Did you tell him, remind him?" "I tried, but the words wouldn't come out right. They got tangled up, came out as normal small talk about weather and traffic. The highway won't let me explain twice to the same person. Each driver gets one conversation where they can hear the truth. After that, I become just another hitchhiker, or I disappear entirely." Carmen glanced at her fuel gauge, watching it drop steadily. That at least seemed to follow normal rules, diesel being consumed at the expected rate. But the mile markers had started acting strangely, sometimes jumping backward, sometimes repeating. Mile 142, mile 141, mile 142 again. The highway was looping, feeding back on itself. "What do you think is happening?" Carmen asked. "Why you? Why this highway?" "I've had 15 years to think about it," Michelle said. "Best theory I have is that I was supposed to die that night. Maybe I would have gotten in an accident, or the cold would have gotten me, or something else. But somehow I slipped sideways from that fate, got caught in between leaving and arriving, departure and destination. The highway is the space between. That's what roads are, really. Ways to get from one place to another, but not places themselves. I'm stuck in the way, neither here nor there." The logic was circular, but somehow made sense in the way nightmare logic does. Carmen found herself accepting it, or at least unable to argue against it. They were on a highway that looped through time, carrying a passenger who couldn't age and couldn't arrive. The world was stranger than she'd imagined. "There has to be a way out," Carmen said. "For you. Some way to break the loop." "I used to think so. Tried everything I could imagine, getting off at exits, but the exits just loop back to the highway. Walking away from the road entirely, but I always end up back on the shoulder waiting. I even tried staying awake for what felt like weeks, refusing to sleep, thinking maybe sleep was when the loop reset. But eventually I'd blink and it would be 3 a.m. again, and I'd be standing on the shoulder in the cold, watching headlights approach." Mile marker 150 appeared, then immediately jumped back to 145. The GPS flickered, its screen fragmenting into nonsense before recovering. Carmen's CB radio crackled with voices speaking in reverse, words inverted and incomprehensible. The normal rules were breaking down completely. "Carmen," Michelle said quietly, "I need to tell you something important. You need to remember this, even though you probably won't. Even though tomorrow this will all seem like a strange dream." "What is it?" "There's a way out for you. When we get close to Oklahoma City, or what passes for close on this highway, you'll see an exit marked 132B. It's not on any map. It appears and disappears. If you take that exit, you'll get off this loop. You'll arrive in Oklahoma City normally, deliver your freight, continue your life. But you have to take it the moment you see it. Don't hesitate." "What about you?" Carmen asked. "I can't take that exit. I've tried. For me, it doesn't exist. I just see regular highway. But I've been with other drivers when they've seen it, and the ones who took it immediately disappeared. Not from the highway, but from my experience, which means they got away. They escaped. You can too. Carmen wanted to ask more, to understand the rules of this impossible road, but her thoughts were growing fuzzy. The dashboard clock showed 2:47 a.m. even earlier than before. She couldn't remember how long she'd been driving. The conversation with Michelle felt both immediate and distant, like something remembered from years ago. "It's starting," Michelle said. "The forgetting. You're fighting it harder than most, but it always wins eventually. Just remember the exit. 132B. Take it when you see it." Mile marker 160 flashed past, then 155, then 163. The numbers were randomizing now, all pretense of sequential order abandoned. Carmen's eyelids felt heavy despite the coffee. She forced them open, focusing on the road, on staying present. Michelle's face flickered in her peripheral vision, sometimes young, sometimes old, sometimes not there at all. "The exit," Carmen mumbled. 132B. "That's right, you remember good." Michelle's voice seemed to come from very far away. "You're going to make it. You're going to get home." The highway stretched ahead and Carmen saw it. Exit 132B, appearing like a mirage but solid, real, with a green sign pointing toward Oklahoma City. She jerked the wheel right, taking the exit ramp without thinking, following that impossible route off the main highway. As the truck descended the ramp, Carmen glanced at the passenger seat. Michelle sat there, smiling sadly, waving goodbye. And then she was gone, and the passenger seat was empty, as if no one had ever been there at all. Carmen merged onto a regular surface street, and the first light of dawn was breaking over Oklahoma City. Her GPS showed her location as downtown, near her delivery destination. The clock read 7:15 a.m., exactly the time she should have arrived if she'd driven straight through from Amarillo. Her logbook, when she checked it, showed no stops, no passengers, nothing unusual about the journey. But Carmen remembered. Against all the rules of the looping highway, she remembered Michelle and the drive through impossible time. She remembered the mile markers counting in wrong directions and the conversation about being trapped between departure and arrival. And she remembered that somewhere on Highway 287, a young woman who should be 38 but looked 23 was standing on the shoulder in the cold, waiting for the next driver to stop. Carmen made her delivery and filed her paperwork. She told no one about the experience. Who would believe it? But she began asking questions carefully and casually of other long-haul drivers. Had they ever had strange experiences on Highway 287? Ever picked up hitchhikers who seemed out of time? The responses were mostly negative, though she noticed how some drivers' eyes would glaze over when she mentioned that specific route, as if trying to remember something important that slipped away. 2 weeks later, Carmen took another route from Los Angeles to Oklahoma City. She specifically requested it, claiming familiarity with the roads. As she approached Amarillo around 3 a.m., she watched the shoulder carefully. And there, right where she'd stopped before, stood Michelle, waving frantically at the approaching truck. Carmen pulled over and Michelle climbed in, looking exactly the same. "Thank you so much," she said. "I didn't think anyone would stop. How far are you going?" "Oklahoma City," Carmen replied, pulling back onto the highway. "But first I need to tell you something about an exit, 132B. I know you think you can't see it, but maybe if we both watch for it together, maybe if we're both looking at the same time." Michelle's eyes widened, showing recognition and hope for the first time in 15 years. "You remember. You actually remember." "I remember," Carmen confirmed, "and I came back, because no one should be stuck alone on a highway to nowhere. We're going to find that exit together, and this time you're coming with me." They drove into the darkness, two women on an impossible road, watching for an exit that might save them both or might save neither. The mile markers flickered past in wrong order and time moved in circles, but Carmen kept her hands steady on the wheel and her eyes fixed ahead. Michelle sat beside her, no longer alone, no longer invisible, and together they counted down the distance toward home or hope or whatever waited at the end of the highway that never ended. Behind them, exit 132B began to materialize in the darkness, appearing and disappearing like a heartbeat, waiting to be seen by two pairs of eyes instead of one. The highway that trapped Michelle had a rule: one driver, one chance, one conversation. But Carmen had bent that rule by remembering, by coming back, by refusing to let the forgetting take hold. The exit grew more solid, more permanent as they approached. Michelle saw it this time, really saw it, not as empty highway but as genuine escape. Carmen signaled right, checked her mirrors and guided the truck onto the ramp, carrying both of them away from the loop and toward Oklahoma City. Toward time that moved forward instead of in circles, toward a world where passengers aged normally and highways led somewhere instead of nowhere. As they descended the exit ramp, Michelle looked at Carmen and said, "Thank you for remembering, for coming back." "Thank you for telling me about the exit," Carmen replied, "for saving me first." They merged onto city streets as dawn broke, and when Carmen glanced at the passenger seat, Michelle was still there, solid and present, and finally, after 15 years, arriving. Story 3. The rest stop that served yesterdays. Gerald Vaughn had been driving refrigerated freight across the Pacific Northwest for 23 years when he pulled into the rest stop on Interstate 84 in eastern Oregon. It was February 2022, deep winter in the Columbia River Gorge, and he'd been on the road for 9 hours straight hauling frozen seafood from Portland to Boise. The digital clock on his dashboard read 11:37 p.m. when he spotted the familiar rest area sign announcing facilities 2 miles ahead. Gerald knew this rest stop well. He'd used it hundreds of times over his decades of driving this route. Standard Oregon highway rest area, clean bathrooms, vending machines, covered picnic tables, a small parking area for trucks separate from passenger vehicles. Nothing fancy, but reliably maintained and usually quiet at this hour. He signaled right and took the exit ramp, his rig rumbling into the nearly empty lot. Only 2 other vehicles occupied the space. A sedan parked near the restrooms and another semi-truck backed into one of the designated spaces. Gerald parked at the far end, completing his logbook entry before climbing down from the cab. The cold hit him immediately, temperature well below freezing with a sharp wind cutting through the gorge. He zipped his jacket tight and headed toward the restroom building, noting the other truck driver, a man in his 50s wearing a company jacket Gerald didn't recognize, standing by the vending machines. The bathroom was clean and warm, exactly as expected. Gerald took his time, washing his face and hands, checking his phone. Still no signal out here in the gorge. Some pockets of these eastern Oregon highways never seemed to get coverage. He dried his hands and stepped back outside, where the cold reasserted itself with renewed force. That's when Gerald noticed the date on the vending machine. Every vending machine had a small sticker showing when it had last been serviced and inspected. This one showed a date that made Gerald's tired brain stutter to a halt: February 17, 2021. Not just the day and month, but the year, exactly 1 year ago to the day. He stared at the sticker, certain he was misreading it, but the numbers remained clear. February 17, 2021. Something wrong with the machine? The other truck driver had approached without Gerald noticing, now standing a few feet away with an expression of mild concern. "The date," Gerald said, pointing at the sticker. "Says it was serviced last year. That can't be right." The other driver leaned in, studying the sticker. "Huh. Probably just a mistake, someone filling out paperwork wrong. Happens all the time." He extended his hand. "Dennis Morgan, driving down from Spokane." Gerald shook his hand, introducing himself. Dennis seemed normal enough, friendly, tired in the way all long-haul drivers got tired, no obvious signs of anything wrong. They made small talk about routes and weather while Gerald tried to shake off the unease the date sticker had triggered. Just a clerical error, like Dennis said. Nothing to worry about. But as they talked, Gerald noticed other small details that accumulated into wrongness. Dennis's truck parked across the lot looked slightly dated, not dramatically so, but enough that Gerald's experienced eye picked up on it. The styling was maybe 5 or 6 years out of current, and the jacket Dennis wore bore a logo for a shipping company Gerald distinctly remembered going out of business in 2019. "What year's your truck?" Gerald asked, trying to sound casual. Dennis laughed. 2015. Bought it new, been running it ever since. Got another couple 100,000 miles in her easy. Gerald nodded, but the math didn't work. A truck from 2015 should show signs of 7 years of wear in 2022, but Dennis's rig looked nearly new. The paint wasn't faded, the chrome wasn't pitted, the tires showed minimal wear. It looked like it had been driven for maybe a year or two at most. "You ever notice anything weird about this rest stop?" Gerald asked. Dennis's expression changed subtly, growing more guarded. "Weird how?" "I don't know, just weird. Things that don't quite add up." "Can't say I have," Dennis replied, but his eyes said otherwise. He glanced toward the parking lot, then back at Gerald. "You planning to stay here long?" "Just needed a bathroom break, getting back on the road in a minute." Yeah, that's smart. Don't stay too long at these places." Dennis turned and walked toward his truck with a pace that suggested urgency rather than casual departure. He climbed into the cab, started the engine, and pulled out of the parking lot with unusual haste, his taillights disappearing back toward the highway entrance. Gerald stood alone in the rest stop, watching Dennis leave. The sedan near the bathrooms remained, its windows dark. No one visible inside. The cold wind pushed against him, carrying a smell he couldn't quite identify. Not unpleasant, but unfamiliar for this location. Something like old paper or dried flowers. He walked back toward his truck, passing the covered picnic tables. One of them had something sitting on it, a newspaper. Gerald picked it up, seeing it was the Oregonian, Portland's major paper. The date across the top stopped him cold. February 17th, 2021. Same date as the vending machine sticker. He flipped through the pages, seeing stories about COVID-19 vaccines starting to roll out, winter storms in Texas, impeachment proceedings in Washington. All news from a year ago. Gerald's hands shook slightly as he set the paper down. Someone must have left an old newspaper here, he told himself. People kept old newspapers for all sorts of reasons. Lining drawers, wrapping items, nostalgia. Nothing weird about finding a year-old paper at a rest stop. Except the paper didn't feel old. It felt crisp, fresh, like it had just come off the press that morning. No yellowing, no weathering, no signs of age. And it had been sitting on an outdoor picnic table in February Oregon weather, yet showed no water damage, no deterioration whatsoever. Gerald hurried to his truck, suddenly eager to leave, but as he reached for the door handle, he noticed something that made his stomach drop. His truck looked different, not dramatically but noticeably. The paint seemed brighter, less faded. The small dent on the passenger side where he'd clipped a loading dock post 3 months ago was gone. The truck looked newer than it should. He climbed into the cab and checked the odometer. 487,234 miles. That couldn't be right. When he'd parked 20 minutes ago, the odometer had read 501,189 miles. He'd been tracking it carefully, knowing he was approaching the 500,000-mile mark. But now it showed nearly 15,000 fewer miles. Gerald grabbed his logbook, flipping to the last entry. The date at the top of the page read February 17th, 2021. His own handwriting, his own truck number, his own route information. But dated exactly 1 year ago. He flipped backward through previous entries, seeing dates from early February 2021, late January 2021, all dates from a year past. His cell phone screen confirmed the impossible. February 17th, 2021, 11:52 p.m. Gerald sat in stunned silence, trying to process what this meant. Either he'd somehow lost an entire year of memory and traveled backward in time, or the rest stop existed in the past, or something else entirely that his rational mind couldn't grasp. He started the engine, determined to get back on the highway, back to somewhere normal where time moved forward and dates made sense. But as he drove toward the rest stop exit, Gerald saw something that made him press the brake. Another truck pulling into the rest stop, headlights cutting through the darkness. The truck looked modern, contemporary styling. It parked near the bathrooms and a driver climbed out, a woman in her 30s moving with the stiff gait of someone who'd been sitting too long. Gerald rolled down his window and called out, "Hey, what's today's date?" The woman looked over, startled by the question. February 17th, why? What year? Gerald pressed. 2022, you okay? Relief flooded through him. She said 2022, the rest stop had let him go, returned him to the present. He gave her a thumbs up. Yeah, I'm fine, just confused for a second, long drive, you be safe. He pulled out of the rest stop and back onto I-84, heading east toward Boise. His phone signal returned after a few miles and he checked the date again. February 17, 2022, normal, present, real. But his odometer still read 487,134 miles and his logbook still showed entries from 2021 with blank pages where the past year should have been, and his truck still looked newer than it had when he'd pulled into the rest stop. Gerald drove through the night trying to make sense of what had happened. The rest stop had been in the past, or a version of the past, and he'd briefly joined it there, but he'd gotten out. He'd left before becoming trapped like Dennis seemed to be, driving his 2015 truck forever in 2021, warning other drivers not to stay too long. Around 4 a.m., Gerald pulled into a truck stop near Baker City to refuel. As the diesel pumped, he walked inside and bought a newspaper from the rack. February 18th, 2022. The date had advanced. Time was moving forward normally now. He was back in the present. But when he returned to his truck and opened the driver door, he found something sitting on his seat that hadn't been there before. A newspaper. The Oregonian, dated February 17th, 2021. The same one he'd seen at the rest stop. Sitting on his seat as if placed there deliberately. Gerald picked it up with shaking hands. A post-it note was stuck to the front page bearing a handwritten message in unfamiliar handwriting. You left early enough this time. Don't stop there again. Not all rest stops let you leave. Dennis. The implications crashed over Gerald. Dennis had somehow placed this in his truck, which meant Dennis could leave the rest stop, or some version of Dennis could. Maybe the Dennis he'd met was trapped in 2021, but another version had escaped. Or maybe time worked differently at that rest stop, allowing people to exist in multiple whens simultaneously. Gerald threw the newspaper in the trash and climbed back in his cab. He needed to finish this run, get to Boise, offload his freight, and then decide what to do with this impossible knowledge. Report it to someone, but who would believe him? The highway patrol? His company? He had no evidence except a newspaper, a logbook with missing entries, and an odometer that showed fewer miles than it should. He drove on through the pre-dawn darkness, but couldn't shake the feeling that something fundamental had changed. He'd driven through time, or time had driven through him, and the boundary between then and now had proven more permeable than he'd ever imagined. The world contained spaces where yesterday still existed, where drivers could slip backward into previous dates and get trapped there, circling through the same day forever. Over the next few months, Gerald researched that rest stop obsessively during his downtime. He found scattered reports online, Threads on trucking forums, posts in paranormal discussion groups, from drivers who'd experienced strange temporal anomalies at various rest areas across the country. Missing time, reversed dates, encounters with people who seemed to be from different years. Most were dismissed as exhaustion-fueled hallucinations or creative writing exercises. But one thread caught his attention. A discussion from March 2021 where a driver named D. Morgan 47 had posted about getting stuck in a time loop at a rest stop in eastern Oregon. The driver described pulling in repeatedly, meeting other drivers, leaving and returning to find the same date and time, unable to escape to the present. The thread had ended abruptly with no resolution. Gerald created an account and sent a direct message to D. Morgan 47, not expecting a response. But 2 days later, one came. "You got out, good. I'm still here. Been here since 2015, experiencing the same days over and over. The rest stop lets you leave sometimes, but you always come back. Eventually, you'll pull in there again. Try to resist, try to drive past, but the exit calls to you. You'll stop. And next time, you might not leave. Be careful. Time's hungry." Gerald stopped using that stretch of I-84. He rerouted his Portland to Boise runs through different highways, adding hours to the trip but avoiding that rest stop. His company questioned the route changes, but he claimed road construction or traffic concerns. They accepted his explanations. But Dennis was right. The exit called to him. Every time Gerald drove anywhere near that section of highway, he felt a pull, an urge to take the exit and stop at the rest area. Just to check, just to see if it was still there, still operating in yesterday. The curiosity gnawed at him, grew stronger with each passing week. In August 2022, 6 months after his original experience, Gerald gave in. He took the exit, pulled into the rest stop. It looked completely normal. Sunny summer afternoon, a few cars, the bathrooms clean and modern. The vending machine service sticker showed a current date. Everything seemed fine. Gerald used the bathroom and returned to his truck, relieved to find it unchanged. His odometer showed the correct mileage. His phone displayed the correct date. Whatever had affected the rest stop in February seemed to have passed or resolved. But as he started his engine, Gerald glanced at the picnic tables and saw someone sitting there. Dennis, looking exactly as he had 6 months ago, watching Gerald with an expression of profound sadness. Dennis raised one hand in a slow wave, then shook his head, a clear warning. Gerald didn't wave back. He put the truck in gear and drove out of the rest stop as fast as safely possible, taking the entrance ramp back to I-84. In his side mirror, he watched the rest area recede behind him. Dennis remained at the picnic table, frozen in that moment, forever warning drivers who would or wouldn't listen. That night, Gerald checked his phone obsessively, confirming the date advanced normally. August 13th, August 14th, August 15th. He was still in the present. He'd visited the rest stop and escaped again. But his logbook showed something new. Entries from February 17th, 2021 that he hadn't written. Descriptions of stops he didn't remember, routes he never drove, deliveries to locations that didn't exist. Some version of him, in some version of yesterday, was still driving through that temporal loop, still making entries in a logbook that existed across multiple time streams. Gerald contacted a physicist at Portland State University explaining his experience in carefully vague terms, presenting it as a hypothetical. The physicist explained theories about closed time-like curves, locations where space-time curved back on itself, potentially allowing for temporal anomalies. Theoretically possible, the physicist said, but requiring extraordinary circumstances, massive gravitational fields or exotic matter. Not the kind of thing you'd encounter at a highway rest stop. But Gerald had encountered it, and he knew others had too. Dennis definitely, probably dozens or hundreds more who'd never reported their experiences or hadn't escaped to tell about them. The rest stop existed as a fold in time, a place where February 17th, 2021 continued to occur simultaneously with all subsequent days, trapping people in its loop or letting them go according to rules Gerald couldn't understand. He never stopped there again. Gave up that route entirely, transferred to different regions, drove different highways far from eastern Oregon. But he kept monitoring the trucking forums, watching for posts from D. Morgan 47, from other drivers who might stumble into temporal rest stops and need warnings or advice. And sometimes, late at night when Gerald was driving through darkness on some distant highway, he'd see rest area signs and feel that pull, that call to stop and check if maybe somehow the rest stop served not just yesterday's but tomorrow's too. What if somewhere there was a rest area trapped in 2023 or 2024 or 2030? What if he could drive forward instead of backward? But Gerald always resisted the call, kept driving, kept his timeline moving in its proper direction. Because he'd learned the fundamental truth about time. It only flows one way for a reason. Those places where it pooled and eddied, where yesterday remained today, were traps disguised as rest. They offered the illusion of stopping, of pausing, of escaping the forward march. But time couldn't be escaped. It could only be lived through minute by minute, mile by mile, moving always toward whatever came next. Gerald had seen what happened when you tried to rest in yesterday. He'd met Dennis, forever trapped at that picnic table, warning drivers in whatever year they happened to stop. He'd seen his own logbook filling with entries from dates that no longer existed. So Gerald drove on, through nights and days, through states and seasons, always moving forward, never stopping at rest areas he didn't recognize, never trusting exits that called too insistently. The highway stretched ahead and time flowed like the white lines on the pavement, leading always forward, never back, until the destination or the end or whatever came after the last mile marker. Behind him in eastern Oregon, the rest stop continued serving yesterdays to anyone who pulled in at the right time, or wrong time, or whatever time the temporal fold decided to present. Dennis sat at his picnic table, warning or waiting. And somewhere in February 2021, another version of Gerald Vaughn was discovering the impossible date on a vending machine sticker, beginning an experience he'd repeat forever unless his present self could find a way to break the loop. But breaking the loop would mean going back, stopping there again, confronting the fold in time directly. And Gerald wasn't ready for that, might never be ready. So he drove on, carrying the knowledge of temporal rest stops in yesterday's newspapers, a secret too strange to share, a warning too unbelievable to give. The highway stretched ahead and Gerald followed it into whatever came next, leaving yesterday behind, where it belonged. Story 4. The CB voice that knew your future. Ryan Kellerman had been driving cargo trucks up and down the East Coast for 15 years when he first heard the voice on Channel 19. It was November 2020, deep into a pandemic year that had made the highways lonelier than ever, and Ryan was hauling electronics from Charlotte to Philadelphia on I-95. The route was familiar, almost boring in its predictability, which made the voice stand out even more starkly against the usual CB chatter. Ryan had his radio tuned to Channel 19, the primary trucker frequency, listening to scattered conversations between drivers discussing routes, weather conditions, speed traps. Standard road communication that provided a sense of connection across the isolated miles. Around 11 p.m. somewhere in Virginia, a new voice broke through the static. "Running man, this is Night Eye. You're going to want to take exit 152 in about 40 miles. There's an accident coming on the main highway just past that point. 3-vehicle pileup, complete road closure. You'll sit there for 6 hours if you don't detour. Exit 152, take the alternate route through Fredericksburg." Ryan's handle was Running Man. He'd used it for years. But he didn't recognize Night Eye as any regular driver on this corridor. The voice sounded strange, too. Not quite natural. Too clear, too precise, lacking the ambient road noise that usually accompanied CB transmissions. Night Eye, this is Running Man. Appreciate the heads up. You monitoring traffic reports? Ryan responded, following CB protocol. Something like that, just trust me on this one. Exit 152, 40 miles, you'll thank me later. Ryan checked his GPS. Exit 152 was indeed about 40 miles ahead, marked as a secondary route through Fredericksburg. He'd taken it before when traffic was bad, though it added some time to the journey. But there were no traffic alerts showing on his phone or GPS, no signs of accidents ahead. Running Man copies, I'll keep an eye out. You got a 20? Where you rolling from? Ryan asked, using trucker slang to ask Night Eye's location. No response. The voice didn't return, and Channel 19 filled with other conversations. Ryan shrugged it off, figuring the driver had moved out of range or switched channels. But the warning stuck in his mind, specific and urgent. 35 miles later, as exit 152 approached, Ryan still saw no signs of trouble ahead. Traffic flowed normally, no brake lights or slowdowns visible. Taking the exit would add at least 20 minutes to his trip. He debated staying on I-95, but something about the voice's certainty made him signal right and take the exit ramp. The alternate route through Fredericksburg was quiet, almost empty at this late hour. Ryan drove through the small city, following the detour back toward I-95. About 40 minutes later, he merged back onto the interstate north of where he'd exited, and that's when he saw it. A massive accident scene in the southbound lanes, emergency vehicles everywhere, flares and roadblocks diverting traffic. 3 vehicles mangled together exactly as the voice had described. From the positioning of the emergency response, Ryan could tell the accident had happened recently, within the last hour or so, right when he would have been passing through if he'd stayed on the highway. Ryan's hands tightened on the steering wheel. The voice had been right. Impossibly, specifically right. Not just about an accident, but about the timing, the number of vehicles, the complete closure. How could anyone have known that in advance unless they'd caused it or what? Seen the future? Ryan grabbed his CB mic. Night Eye, this is Running Man. You were right about that accident. How did you know? Over. Static filled the speaker for several seconds, then, because it already happened, Running Man. For me, it's already in the past. For you, it was the future. Time works different on these channels sometimes. I'm trying to help where I can. You're saying you're calling from the future? Is this some kind of joke? Ryan asked, skepticism warring with the evidence of the accident scene still visible in his mirrors. Not a joke, not exactly the future either. It's complicated. Think of it like this. I'm driving the same roads as you, but I'm a few hours ahead. What I see now, you'll see later. I'm just passing information back to help you avoid problems. Ryan's logical mind rebelled against the explanation, but he couldn't deny the accuracy of the warning. If you can see ahead, tell me something else, something I can verify. Fair enough. In about 90 miles, you're going to get low on fuel. You'll be thinking about stopping at the big truck plaza right off exit 221. Don't. Their diesel pumps are contaminated, algae bloom in the storage tanks. You'll ruin your fuel system. Push on to exit 234 instead. The extra distance is worth it. Ryan checked his fuel gauge, just over half full. He'd been planning to refuel somewhere in the next 100 miles, and exit 221 was one of his regular stops. How do I know you're not just guessing? You don't, but check the trucker forums tomorrow. There'll be posts about that truck plaza, drivers complaining about engine problems after refueling there tonight. The contamination won't be discovered for another day or 2. By then, dozens of trucks will be damaged. You can be one of them, or you can listen. The transmission ended. Ryan drove on, troubled and uncertain. The obvious explanation was elaborate prank. someone monitoring traffic reports and making lucky guesses. But the timing of the accident warning had been too precise, too specific, and the voice's explanation, while impossible, had a strange internal consistency. 90 miles later, approaching exit 221, Ryan saw the familiar truck plaza sign. His fuel gauge showed less than a quarter tank. Normally, he'd stop here without question. But the voice's warning echoed in his mind. Contaminated diesel, algae bloom, engine damage. He drove past the exit, pushing on toward exit 234. The next 40 miles felt long, his fuel gauge creeping toward empty. But he made it to the alternate truck stop, refueling without incident. The diesel looked clean. The pumps functioned normally. He had no way to know if the warning had been legitimate or if he'd just burned extra fuel out of paranoia. Ryan grabbed dinner in the truck stop diner, pulling out his phone to check the trucker forums he frequented. Nothing yet about fuel contamination at exit 221. He posted a question. Anyone refuel at the truck plaza at exit 221 on I-95 in Virginia tonight? How's your engine running? He didn't expect immediate responses, but within 20 minutes, 3 drivers replied. All 3 had stopped at that plaza. All 3 reported their engines running rough, strange noises, loss of power. One was already broken down on the shoulder, waiting for a tow. Ryan felt ice crystallize in his stomach. The voice had been right again. Not just plausibly right, but specifically impossibly right about something that shouldn't have been knowable in advance. He grabbed his CB mic, selecting channel 19. Night Eye, this is Running Man. You there? I need to talk to you. Over. The response came immediately, as if the voice had been waiting. I'm here, Running Man. You avoided the bad fuel. Good. That would have cost you thousands in repairs. How are you doing this, really? No more cryptic explanations. How do you know what's going to happen? I told you, I'm ahead of you on the timeline. A few hours ahead, sometimes more. I can see what's happened to me and warn you before it happens to you. Think of me as an early warning system. But that's not possible, Ryan said. Time doesn't work that way. Doesn't it? You're using radio waves right now, Running Man. Electromagnetic radiation traveling at the speed of light. Under certain conditions, in certain places, those signals can get bent, reflected, refracted through space and time. You're hearing me from your future, or I'm hearing you from my past. Depends on perspective. Ryan wanted to argue, to insist on rational explanations, but he'd already experienced 2 warnings that had proven correct. If you're really from my future, tell me something personal, something only I would know. There was a pause, longer than before. Then, you're carrying a photograph in your wallet. Your daughter Sarah, age 7, missing her front teeth. The photo was taken at her school picture day 3 months ago. You look at it every time you stop for a break, especially when the drives get long and lonely. You're thinking about it right now. Ryan's hand unconsciously moved to his back pocket where his wallet sat. The photograph was there exactly as described. Sarah's gap-toothed smile captured 3 months ago. He looked at it often, especially during the pandemic isolation when he couldn't visit her as regularly. How did you... Ryan's voice trailed off. Because I'm you, Running Man. Or I was you. I'm Ryan Kellerman driving this same route, but I'm 8 hours ahead of you. Everything you're experiencing now, I experienced 8 hours ago. I'm trying to warn my past self, help myself avoid the problems I encountered. The implication crashed over Ryan like a wave. The voice wasn't some mysterious stranger. It was him. His own voice from 8 hours in the future, using the CB radio to send warnings backward through time. That's impossible, Ryan whispered. Is it? You verified 2 warnings already. How many coincidences before you accept the evidence? I'm you, Ryan. 8 hours from now, you'll be where I am now, and you'll pick up the CB to warn yourself 8 hours in the past. The loop continues. We're helping ourselves over and over. Ryan pulled his truck onto the shoulder, unable to drive while processing this. If the voice was really his future self, that meant... What? Time travel was real? Causality was broken? He tried to think through the implications, but they spiraled into paradox. Why 8 hours? Ryan asked. Why not more or less? I don't know the mechanism. Something about the radio frequency, the electromagnetic conditions, the route we're driving. But I can only reach back 8 hours and only along this stretch of highway. It doesn't work everywhere, just here, just now, just us. What else do I need to know? If you're really me, what else happens in the next 8 hours? Another pause. Then, at 3:47 a.m., you're going to get a call from Sarah's mother. She's in the hospital, burst appendix, emergency surgery. Sarah's with a neighbor. You'll want to turn around immediately, drive back to Charlotte. Don't. The surgery goes fine. She's out of danger by 5 a.m. If you turn around now, you'll burn the load, lose your contract, and arrive too late to help anyway. Push through to Philadelphia, deliver the cargo, then drive back. You'll make better time and actually be there when Sarah needs you tomorrow afternoon. Ryan felt his throat tighten. Is she okay? Sarah's mom, is she really okay? She's fine. Scared, but fine. And Sarah's fine too. But you need to stay calm when you get that call. Trust me, trust yourself on this. The best thing you can do is finish the job and drive back tomorrow. Ryan sat in his idling truck, staring at the CB radio. His future self was preparing him for a crisis, giving him information to make better decisions. If this was real, and increasingly Ryan had to accept it might be, then he was receiving an extraordinary gift, foreknowledge without having to suffer through the events first. Thank you, Ryan said quietly, for warning me, for helping. You'll do the same, the voice replied. 8 hours from now, you'll pick up the radio and warn your past self. That's how this works. We're a loop, helping ourselves over and over. Just be careful. Don't change too much. Don't tell yourself things you're not ready to hear. Keep the timeline stable. What happens if I change something significant? I don't know. I've never tried. The warnings I've given you, the accident, the fuel, the hospital call, I gave those same warnings to myself 8 hours ago. We're following the same script. If you deviate, if you make different choices... The voice faded into static, then returned. I don't know what happens. Maybe the loop breaks. Maybe I stop existing. Maybe everything changes. Maybe nothing changes. Causality is complicated. Ryan started driving again, merging back onto I-95. He had hours before the hospital call. Hours to prepare mentally and emotionally for news that would be devastating if unexpected but manageable with forewarning. At 3:47 a.m. exactly, his phone rang. The caller ID showed Sarah's mother's name. Ryan took a deep breath and answered, keeping his voice calm and steady as she frantically explained about the appendicitis, the emergency surgery, the hospital. Ryan listened, asked appropriate questions, provided reassurance, explained he'd finish his delivery and drive straight back tomorrow. She seemed surprised by his composure, expecting panic or anger. But Ryan had 8 hours to prepare, 8 hours to process his emotional reactions privately. The conversation ended with promises to text updates and see each other soon. Ryan hung up and grabbed his CB mic. Thank you, he said simply, knowing his future self 8 hours ahead was listening. You were right. I'm handling it. You're welcome, came the reply. Now you know what to do 8 hours from now. Ryan drove through the pre-dawn darkness, arriving in Philadelphia just after 7 a.m. He unloaded his cargo, filed his paperwork, and started the drive back to Charlotte. Around 11 a.m., 8 hours after the hospital call, Ryan picked up his CB radio and tuned to Channel 19. Running man, this is Night Eye, he said, speaking the words he'd heard himself say hours earlier. You're going to want to take exit 152 in about 40 miles. He delivered the same warnings, used the same phrasing. maintained the loop that had helped him. And he understood now that he'd keep doing this every time he drove this route, warning his past self about dangers ahead, receiving warnings from his future self, an endless chain of causality folding back on itself. But as Ryan repeated the warnings, he felt a temptation growing. To say more, to warn his past self about things further ahead. He knew stock prices from the morning news. He knew lottery numbers. He knew personal information that could advantage his past self enormously. The power to change his own timeline sat in his hand, requiring only that he speak different words into the CB mic. Ryan opened his mouth, ready to deliver information beyond the script. But something stopped him. Caution or wisdom, or fear of unknown consequences. The loop had saved him from an accident, from contaminated fuel, from making panicked decisions about the hospital. It worked because it was stable, consistent, proven. Changing it might help, but it might also break everything. So Ryan stuck to the script, delivered the warnings he'd received, and signed off Channel 19. The loop held. He drove back to Charlotte, arriving that afternoon to find Sarah's mother recovering well. Sarah happy to see him. Everything happened as his future self had predicted, because his future self had already lived it. Over subsequent trips on that route, Ryan continued the pattern. Always the same warnings, always at the same times, maintaining the stable loop. He experimented once, tried to warn his past self about a minor delay at a way station. But the transmission failed, dissolving into static. The loop only accepted warnings that had already been received, changes that had already happened. Causality policed itself. Ryan grew accustomed to the doubled perspective, experiencing events while simultaneously remembering having warned himself about them 8 hours earlier and preparing to warn himself in 8 hours. His timeline became layered, each moment existing in triplicate, past, present, future, all accessible through the CB radio on this specific stretch of highway. Other drivers sometimes asked about Night Eye, wondering who the mysterious voice was that occasionally delivered uncannily accurate warnings. Ryan never explained. How could he? The truth was too strange, too self-referential. He was Night Eye. Night Eye was him. They were the same person, separated by 8 hours and connected by radio waves bent through time. The loop continued, stable and consistent, a closed causality curve that Ryan drove through again and again. He helped himself, was helped by himself, existed in perpetual conversation with his own past and future. And as long as he followed the script, maintained the warnings, kept the timeline stable, everything worked. But sometimes late at night, when the highway stretched empty and endless before him, Ryan wondered, what would happen if he broke the loop? If he delivered different warnings, changed his own past, created a new timeline? Would he cease to exist, replaced by a different version of himself that had lived different events? Or would two timelines split apart, both versions of Ryan continuing in parallel? He never found out. Fear or caution kept him repeating the same warnings, maintaining the same stable loop. And maybe that was wisdom, accepting the gift of foreknowledge without demanding more, using time's strange flexibility to help himself without trying to control it entirely. Ryan drove on, through days and nights that folded back on themselves, speaking to his past self and listening to his future self, a loop of one person helping himself through the impossible geometry of time bent by radio waves on a Virginia highway, where causality curved like the road itself, leading forever forward while looking back. Story 5. The convoy that drove into yesterday. Thomas Martinez had been coordinating convoys for a specialized transport company for 18 years when he organized the 6-truck caravan that departed from Memphis in January 2023. The cargo was unusual but not unprecedented. Decommissioned military equipment being transported to a secure disposal facility in Nevada. 6 semi-trucks, 6 drivers Thomas had worked with for years, all experienced with oversized loads and specialized cargo. The route was carefully planned. Memphis to Little Rock, then west on I-40 through Oklahoma and the Texas Panhandle, cutting north through New Mexico and into Nevada. Total distance, 1,600 miles. Estimated time, 3 days with scheduled stops. Everything was coordinated and mapped with precision Thomas had learned over nearly 2 decades in the business. They departed Memphis at 6 a.m. on January 23rd, rolling out in formation with Thomas in the lead truck, the others spaced at regular intervals behind him. The weather forecast was clear, the trucks were inspected and certified, the drivers were rested. Standard convoy operation, nothing unusual anticipated. The first day proceeded exactly as planned. They made their scheduled stops, maintained formation, communicated regularly via dedicated CB channel. By nightfall, the convoy was parked at a truck plaza outside Oklahoma City, all 6 trucks accounted for, all drivers checked in. Thomas reviewed the next day's route with everyone, confirming waypoints and timing. They'd cross the Texas Panhandle tomorrow, reaching Tucumcari, New Mexico by evening. Day 2 started equally smoothly. The convoy departed Oklahoma City at 6 a.m. sharp, maintaining their spacing and speed. Thomas monitored everyone via CB, receiving regular position updates. By noon, they were approaching Amarillo, making excellent time. That's when things began to change in ways Thomas couldn't immediately identify. Small details that accumulated into wrongness. The highway looked slightly different, not dramatically altered, but subtly wrong. The pavement seemed older, more weathered. The mile markers appeared faded. Even the vehicles sharing the highway seemed dated, styles from a few years past. "Lead truck, this is truck 3, came a voice over the CB. "Anyone else noticing the traffic looks weird? Lots of older cars." Thomas had noticed but hadn't wanted to say anything, worried it would sound irrational. Truck 3 lead confirms, keeping an eye on it. "Everyone stay in formation." They pushed on through Amarillo and into the Texas Panhandle, that vast, flat expanse where sky and land seemed to meet at infinite distance. The wrongness intensified. Thomas's GPS began showing incorrect dates for map updates, flickering between current year and previous years. His dashboard clock, normally rock-solid accurate, started drifting backward, seconds at first, then minutes. "Lead truck, this is truck 6, another driver called. "My phone is doing something weird, date keeps changing, shows 2022, then 2023, back and forth." "All trucks, this is lead. Confirm you're experiencing date anomalies, don't panic. Likely some kind of electromagnetic interference affecting electronics. Stay focused on driving. We're sticking to the route." But Thomas felt far less confident than he sounded. This wasn't normal interference. Something was affecting the convoy in a coordinated way, changing how they experienced time or how electronics registered it. He considered pulling over, stopping to assess, but the road ahead looked clear, and stopping in the middle of nowhere with specialized military cargo seemed riskier than pushing forward. Around 3 p.m., the convoy approached the New Mexico border. Thomas expected to see the "Welcome to New Mexico" sign, the border markers, the landscape transition from Texas Panhandle to New Mexico Plateau. But instead, the highway just continued. Same flat Texas terrain, same weathered pavement, same sense of